John McMullen is in with us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. He's brought to you by Harrah's Resort, Bally's Atlantic City, Wild Wild West. They're taking bets at the new sports book. Break up with your bookie. Wager today at the book. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. John, how are you?
Doing well. How are you guys?
Oh, we're doing great.
Good, Another
man,
day.
good.
Eagles getting ready for Jags. When are they flying out of here?
They are flying out tomorrow after practice, late in the afternoon.
So tomorrow after practice, so that means Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So they have a couple of days to kind of get themselves acclimated to the time change, I guess, right?
Yeah, they're trying to keep it on East Coast time, and then everybody should sleep is how they're saying it on Friday, and then everybody should be ready to go from that standpoint Friday night after they practice there. And everyone says they've done the studies, and this is the best way to do it. Back when they started these games, the teams used to have to go for the entire week because they had all this media availability and local, and they wanted them to practice out there. It's changed because it's become more normalized. So most teams do it the way the Eagles are doing it.
Let's get into some of the news today. I saw Wendell Smallwood, another banged-up running back here. What is the latest on Smallwood?
Well, good news there. He did not miss practice. He missed practice, but not for injury reasons. The Eagles just informed us it was personal. So that could be – I shouldn't say it is positive. It could be positive because we don't know what the personal reasons are yet. But at least it's not an injury because we went out there today and we saw 3 running backs in uniform, and one of them, Stenell Pumphrey, who just got back here yesterday and is obviously on the practice squad. He's not even on the active roster. So that's a bit of good news in the fact that Wendell did miss practice, but it was for personal reasons, not injury reasons.
And one of the guys who also was not at practice of the 3, Darren Sproles, out over a month now with this hamstring problem.
Yeah, I mean, this seems to be a league-wide thing with these hamstrings. It really is. I think it's kind of shifted, especially with the fast guys, so to speak. And when you saw the schedule and you saw things, I mentioned this last week, as you saw it getting incrementally closer to the bye week, I said last week, there's no way he's going to play in this game. There's no way you're going to put him back in this game with the bye week coming after. You're going to get that extra 2 weeks. So it's no surprise he was not on the practice field. I don't think there's any chance he's playing in London, and the hope would be to get him back after the bye week.
I know, and apparently the field over there for soccer, the fields are a lot softer, like, right? They're not these firm fields like you have here in the States, and I guess that's to try to prevent some of they have less ACL problems in that because there's a lot more give in these fields.
Yeah, I mean, I know NFL teams in general don't like playing on non-NFL fields, so they always have that sort of haughty thought process, especially in Mexico City more than anywhere else. But nobody likes playing on non-NFL fields. You saw what happened a couple of years ago at the Hall of Fame game when they had to cancel it because the field wasn't up to the standards of what they've created in the modern NFL. And if you want to go all the way back to the old vet, you remember the Brian Billick game, who just flat out said he wasn't going to play a preseason game.
John, I'm curious. This stat popped up today from NFL Matchup on ESPN. I don't know if you guys have talked to Doug Groh, just the offense at all about this and how much it's come up, but explosive plays on offense this year, NFL teams that have a rush 15-plus yards, reception 20-plus yards, though that combines the explosive plays. Eagles are dead last in the NFL compared to the Chargers, Chiefs, Rams right there at the top. Has that been a topic of conversation much as we get deeper into the season, which is just not the personnel so much, just the lack of explosive plays?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a talking point for a while. We've been talking about it. We've been mentioning it. There is no sort of explosion on this team right now. when your best receiver is your tight end, who's a heck of a tight end, but let's be realistic. I mean, those guys aren't explosive like outside receivers. You're talking about the running game we just mentioned. The leading rusher on this team is Wendell Smallwood, who wasn't even supposed to make the team when we assembled in training camp. So a lot of it is the injuries, but some of it is the game planning, and we've talked a lot this week with Mike Rowe and Doug Peterson about Nelson Aguilar and the way they've been using him. It seems they've turned him into more of a manufactured touch player who's getting the ball behind the line of scrimmage, at the line of scrimmage, and they're asking him to get yards after the catch. And we've talked ad nauseum about them not having Mike Wallace and Mac Hollins and somebody to stretch the field. That's a big issue, and it's going to continue to be a big issue because they do not. When you look at somebody like Kansas City, as you mentioned, and you have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and Kareem Hunt, and all of a sudden Sammy Watkins is your fourth option. It's not like that here right now.
The one thing you brought up about Aguilar, I do want to follow up on that because we've been looking around for things that are different. You know, Blunt's not here to kind of run games out, maybe, but the way they're using him is, don't you agree? Did they acknowledge that it's significantly different?
Yeah, well, they never acknowledge something is significantly different, but they acknowledge it has been a little bit different. And I think from Doug's perspective, he kind of intimated at least that he's trying to get him involved and he's trying to get his confidence up. You know, I heard you guys talking about Jake Elliott before I came on. And, you know, Mike, I've talked about this a lot. How many players had career years last year?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And how many players and could you really expect sequels to that? Well, Nelson's in that category. He had a career year after two really, not even mediocre years. He was bad. And all of a sudden, we fast forward to this season. He's not as bad as he was in his first two seasons, but he's nowhere near where he was as his third season. So he's certainly regressed sort of to the mean. And I think from Doug's perspective, he's trying to get that confidence back, and he thinks he can get it back if he gets the football in his hands in a manufactured touch and he does something. Hasn't worked to this point.
John, what changes, if any, have you seen the Eagles make in practice this week, or possibly just you anticipate them making Sunday against the Jaguars, whether it's formation, personnel, rotation, anything of the sort?
I think we're going to see a trick play. And I'll tell you why, because we only get to watch the first 15 minutes of practice and stretching and individual drills during the regular season. And they were on the far field from where the gate is, where we enter as the media. And as they were shuttling us off the field, they veered us into the building instead of the normal traffic as they started the real portion of practice. Now, maybe I'm overreacting, but they never want us in that building. So they didn't want us to see something walking off the field. And that leads me to believe they're working on something.
Yeah, I don't know. We've talked about this every week about how are they going to lose this football game. Nashville, the Titans only do one thing well. Minnesota, we've had this conversation, but forget the Eagles for just a second. The amount of chaos and infighting and disarray that the Jaguars are in, yeah, it's a quasi-home game for them, but just looking at the non-X's and O's that the Jaguars are dealing with, John, I mean, how do you lose to this team when they are reeling right now, not only on the field, but in the locker room too?
Yeah, things are not going well, and you could argue desperation from both standpoints. For the Jaguars, I mean, you look at their defense and the fact that, yeah, people point to the Cowboys game, and it's not the same as last year. And that's probably true, but you look up and there's the second-ranked defense in the NFL, which is exactly what they were last year, and they're the top-ranked pass defense in the NFL. and they have Jalen Ramsey, and they have A.J. Boye, and they have guys that can shut down the passing game. And we just talked about this team not having weapons and not being able to generate explosive plays. So to me, if you're looking for a path for the Jaguars, it's obviously on the defensive side of the football. I mean, the Eagles aren't scoring on anybody. Why should they score on the Jaguars?
Jacksonville, obviously, not as good defensively as they had been in the past, or many people thought. They had played that great game against the Patriots earlier this year, and they have fallen apart since that. And part of that is the quarterback. They are going to start Blake Bortles, but he's on a short leash. But it doesn't sound like, John, the Eagles are all that impressed with the Jacksonville quarterback. In fact, it sounds like they think there's a certain out-of-work quarterback who may help this team.
Yeah, we were talking to Malcolm Jenkins today, and I tweeted this out, and I kind of took a double take. And obviously it was about the Eric Reed stuff, and it veered off into a different direction, and you know, Malcolm is who he is, and he's always going to take the high road. And he paid deference sort of to Colin Kaepernick for starting the social justice movement in the NFL. And he said he believes he's been blackballed. And he said, all you got to do is turn on the tape this week of our opponent, and you can see he deserves a job in this league. And I was kind of stunned by that because – hey, that's the definition of bulletin board material. He may be right because Blake Bortles stinks, but and Malcolm is generally very, very measured. He's not the type of guy that's just going to say something that he doesn't want out there. There were a bunch of us talking to Malcolm, and that got us all just raising our eyebrows.
John, speaking of bulletin board material, Doug Peterson questioned Marrone last year in the AFC Championship game with his play calling. Is there anything there? I know you tweeted out that Doug Marrone said that he has no issues with it, but is Marrone going to try and do something a little bit different or special this week against Peterson?
Yeah, I can't imagine Doug Marrone's happy about it. There's no surprise he tried to play it down. Doug played it down as well. But he took some shots at him in his book and about how cautious he was in the AFC Championship game. If he went in a different direction, the Jaguars probably would have been in the Super Bowl. And Doug, let's face it, he's got the reputation of being the most aggressive coach in this league, and people are starting to copy the Eagles. You saw the Giants do it when they were down 2 touchdowns scored and went for the 2-point conversion.
Right.
And none of the ESPN people understood what they were doing. But the Eagles, that's exactly what they did against the Vikings, nearly came back to win that football game. So people are looking at Doug and looking at this organization as an innovative one. But I'm sure Doug Marrone's not happy with what was in that book.
Oh, well. Let me ask you about something you mentioned with desperation. And I know you were talking about it from the Jaguars side, but you're there in South Philly, the NovaCare. You're there at the practice facility talking to these players, John. If you can just paint a picture for us, how has the level of desperation increased this week more so than it has the last couple of weeks, just with talking to these players?
Well, I'll tell you, you don't see it with the core leaders of this team. You don't see it with the Malcolm Jenkins, Fletcher Coxes, Brandon Grahams. You don't see it with them. You see it with sort of the lesser players who aren't used to talking and aren't used to holding court each week. And they sort of make themselves sparse because they don't want to talk about things. Only want to talk about things when they're positive. So it's more of what you don't see than what you do see, because there are certain guys that are going to sit there and talk to you, win, lose, or draw, whether things are going great or horribly. And they're all very, very consistent. And you can't really tell the difference between a win and a loss. It's the other players, you start to understand or feeling a little bit of the pressure that Doug Peterson said isn't there any longer. It's there because, hey, we can say the NFC East is bad, and it is, and there's 5 division games left, and all of that is true. But you look at the schedule this week, and what Washington has, they're probably going to be 5-2. So if the Eagles lose another one, all of a sudden you're 3 games back in the loss column.
Yep. Hey, by the way, I said yesterday, John, I think Washington's going to get in as a wild card team or something. I mean, they beat Green Bay head-to-head already. So if those 2 teams come down, you just mentioned it. They play the Giants, twice, right? That's got to be 2 wins. They're going to
– you would.
They got 6 wins. They got to get 4 more wins, 3 or 4 more wins the rest of the way.
Yeah, the math becomes problematic if the Redskins do what they're expected to do this week, and the Eagles aren't able to beat the Jaguars. The math becomes difficult. It really does.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. Don't forget tomorrow night, Mosher, McMullen, and Krause, the live from the Landmark Americana from 6 to 8. They'll have plenty more on this London matchup as 7 players missed today's practice. Haloti Nada is back. So for more, go to 97.3 ESPN.com. And very interesting stuff. John, appreciate the time as always, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.